Today's story is a well-known Chinese mystery that barely registers in the West, not because it's small, but because it happened far from the places that usually get translated. And it happened to a man so ordinary that, on paper, his life should have left no trace beyond the harvest records. It begins the way most lives in Dongbeigao began in the summer of 1977, with work that made the body feel older than it was, with dust on the roads, with the quiet certainty that tomorrow would look like today. And then, on one night in late July, that certainty broke so cleanly it left no splinters, just a missing bed, a folded set of clothes, and a village full of people discovering that the world could take a man without leaving a trail. Late on the evening of July 27th, 1977, a 21-year-old farmer named Huang Yanqiu walked down a wide, dusty road in his small farming village in Hebei province. It had been a hard day on the rice farm, hard in the boring, grinding way that didn't come with drama, just the steady erasure of strength. They were preparing for the autumn harvest, which meant every hour was treated like it mattered, and every muscle was asked for one more pull, one more lift, one more trip down the row. Huang should have been silent from exhaustion. Instead, he was whistling. Not quietly either. He was whistling with the unguarded brightness of someone who had finally been given permission to want something. The tune was simple and a little off-key, but it carried down the road like a small flag he didn't realize he was waving. For the first time in a long time, Huang felt excited about the future. He had grown up poor. He hadn't finished elementary school. He still lived with his parents in a tiny house. Every day of his life had been the same. Wake up at sunrise, walk to work until his legs shook under him, walk home, eat, sleep, repeat. But now there was a plan. Huang had just gotten engaged to a beautiful girl in a neighboring village, and they planned to marry after the autumn harvest. It wasn't a romantic fantasy so much as an agreement with the world. We will endure this season. Then we will start. And Huang, who had never owned much of anything, was doing something that made him feel almost reckless with hope. He was building them a house, not some grand structure, not a mansion, not a thing that belonged in the city, but his own home, his future, brick by brick, with hands that were used to toil and had suddenly been given a reason to do it with pride. That night, the reason Huang was walking down the dusty road wasn't to work on the house. He was going there to look at it, to admire the property the way people admired miracles. Quietly, reverently, as if staring too directly might make it vanish, he turned a corner, and there it was. The half-constructed home coming into focus under the dimness of evening. The foundation was set. The walls were up. The ceiling was complete. All that remained were windows and doors. Finishing touches that made something feel lived in, human. Huang walked up and ran his hand over the brick he had laid around the outside. Brick wasn't cheap. He had worked extra hours to afford it. The kind of hours that stole sleep and left you counting pain in the joints. His fingertips moved along the rough surface as if he could feel each hour embedded in it. He stepped back. He imagined the house finished. Doors swinging open, windows glowing in the early morning, his fiancée inside. Life finally changing shape. When he felt satisfied, he nodded to himself like a man sealing a promise. Then he turned and started walking back toward his parents' home, only a few minutes away. Inside, his mother already had a meal waiting, rice and vegetables, simple and warm. Huang sat down, ate, and then his parents came over and chatted with him. And as it always did lately, The conversation drifted to the upcoming marriage. Huang talked about it the way people talk about the one good thing holding them together. He talked about timing, about the harvest, about the house. He talked until the words began to slur from fatigue. By about 10 p.m., he was so tired he crawled into bed and fell asleep almost immediately. The next morning, when Huang's parents woke up, they discovered Huang was not in his bed. At first, it didn't feel like a catastrophe. Huang was a hard worker. It wasn't unusual for him to wake up early and head out to the farm to begin his workday. But then the morning unfolded in a way it never had. The workers at the rice farm realized Huang had not shown up. Because this was so out of character, one of the workers walked to Huang's parents' home to see if he was okay. When Huang's mother heard he wasn't at the farm, worry rose fast in her. Sharp and instinctive, the kind of fear a parent feels before the mind has even decided what the fear is about. But she tried to force it down. "Oh, he must have gone to the house he's building," she said. "Go over there and see if he's there." The worker went to Huang's property. Nobody was there. When he returned and told Huang's mother, something in her expression broke open, panic spilling out where composure had been. For her, it wasn't just strange, it was impossible. Huang would never miss work. He would never disappear like this. Something was wrong. She sent the farm worker to find her husband and tell him what was going on. In the meantime, she went outside and started going door to door, asking neighbors if they had seen her son, if they could help look. Dongbaigao was small. Most people knew each other's routines and lives. News moved quickly, like a wind that didn't need permission. It didn't take long before the entire village knew Huang was missing, and the community came out in force. By afternoon, people were on bicycles riding around calling out Huang's name. Others went to neighboring villages to see if he had wandered there. A group went to Huang's fiance's home. She had no idea where he was. By early afternoon, after so many people had searched and found nothing, it became clear that nobody had a clue what happened to him. And Dongbaigao was isolated enough that the absence felt final. Most people didn't have phones. They didn't have cars. Bicycles were the default. There were no quick roads that connected the village to the wider world. The paved road that ran through Dongbaigao didn't lead neatly outward. It ended on the outskirts, the way some lives felt like they ended. Not with a crash, but with a quiet stop. If you lived there, there was a finite number of places you could go, and the villagers had searched all of them. Then they started noticing the details that made the missing feel even more wrong. Huang's bicycle was still leaning against his parents' house. His work clothes, the ones he wore almost every single day, were folded neatly inside his room. So wherever Huang was, he had left on foot, and he had left without dressing for the day. The village committee, Dongbeigao's local governing body, was contacted that night. The committee decided it was serious enough to contact police. But the police did not launch an investigation right away. Resources were limited, and there was no clear sign of foul play. Huang was an adult. If he wanted to vanish, it was, strangely, his right. So Huang's family and the villagers were forced to wait, and the waiting stretched. Over the next few days, Huang did not return. No new information came. The village's searching voices went hoarse, and then quiet, and his mother's fear turned into a kind of exhausted grief, one that still hadn't accepted the loss, but couldn't hold the panic at full volume anymore. Early on the morning of August 5th, 8 days after Huang went missing, the deputy director of the village committee came running up the road to Huang's parents' house. He knocked hard. When the door opened, Huang's father stood there, older than he had looked a week earlier, as if worry had physically added weight. The deputy director handed him a telegram. "Read it," he said. Huang's father took it and began reading. As he read, his eyes widened. Not with relief. With confusion so sharp it looked like shock. The telegram had been sent 8 days earlier, dated around 9 a.m. on July 28th, right around the time Huang's family discovered he was missing. But it had been delayed, and now, only now, its contents arrived like a message from a different universe. It said that Huang Yanqiu had been found far to the south, in connection with the authorities who handled people who were displaced, confused, or without the correct papers, held in a place meant to root them back where they belonged. And it implied something that felt impossible. That within hours of falling asleep in his parents' home, Huang had been discovered on the streets of a distant city, and then moved through the system to be held for repatriation. Huang's father and the deputy director stared at each other. They did what reasonable people do. They assumed it had to be a mistake. Huang had no car. He had left his bicycle behind. He was likely in sleep clothes. Even if he walked to the nearest train station, miles away, there wasn't enough time for him to travel that far by conventional means. So they sent a telegram back, and they said, if this is truly Huang Yanqiu, he should have a specific birthmark on his wrist. They expected a reply that would say, "We were wrong." Instead, the reply came back relatively quickly. Yes, he has that exact birthmark. It is definitely Huang. And he is confused, doesn't know what is happening. Someone from the village must come get him. Huang returned home in the middle of August, about 2 weeks after he had gone missing. His parents were overwhelmed with relief. His fiancée came, and for a moment it looked like the future had returned, like this had all been a nightmare that ended when the door opened. Then the village arrived. Friends, neighbors, family members, people who had searched, people who had whispered, people who had prayed, came to Huang's house to hear his story. What happened? How did you get there? Where were you? Who took you? At first, Huang mostly did not answer. He kept his head down and said again and again, "I don't know." But when his family pressed him, when his mother demanded an explanation the way only a mother can, Huang finally said something that made the room go still. "I'll tell you what happened," he said. "But I don't even know if I can believe the things I'm going to tell you." He said the last thing he remembered was going to bed in his own bed in Dongbeigao. And then the next morning, he woke up lying on a sidewalk. When he opened his eyes, he saw a large body of water nearby, described in his memory like a swimming pool, something man-made and urban. Nearby, there was a sign that said the name of the city, Nanjing. That was how he understood, in that first bewildered moment, that he wasn't in his village anymore. Almost immediately, 2 police officers, wearing white, appeared as if they had been waiting for him to wake. They didn't offer a comforting explanation. They didn't sit with him like a lost child. They simply took him, moved him into the hands of a system that existed to send the displaced back where they belonged. They brought him toward the place that would eventually hold him in Shanghai, the repatriation center. And that, according to Huang, was the entire story. He woke up in Nanjing without knowing how. Then he was swept up by officers in white and moved into custody, designed to return him home. His family stared at him after he finished, because the story did not make sense. But Huang looked normal. He was lucid. He wasn't raving. He wasn't smiling like a man enjoying attention. He spoke simply, as if describing a fact. And that simplicity was, somehow, the most unsettling part. Over the next few weeks, Huang reintegrated into his life. But life did not reintegrate around him. People were scared of him. Children ran away when they saw him as if his body itself had become contagious. Villagers gossiped openly in front of him, as though he wasn't fully human anymore, more rumor than person. Even his fiancée, who had once looked at him like the future, admitted she felt uncomfortable around him now. Huang understood why. He didn't have a good explanation. And worse, he was terrified of himself. At night, lying in bed, he would feel fear creep into his chest. Fear that the moment he closed his eyes, he would be transported again, hundreds or thousands of miles away. Fear that next time, there would be no repatriation system to funnel him home. Fear that he would wake somewhere nobody would bother to send a telegram. But the days wore on, and Huang continued to wake up in his own bed. Slowly, security returned. Not real security, but the fragile kind people build when they're desperate for normalcy. He started to believe it had been a one-time event. Then, on September 8th, 1977, he went to sleep in his bed in Dongbegao. And when he woke up, he was not there. The first thing Huang noticed was that the sounds around him were wrong. At home, he would hear his parents snoring nearby. He might hear insects outside, the small life of the village pressing against the night. Those sounds were gone. Instead, he heard footsteps on cement. Sharp clicking like high heels, a rhythm too precise, too close. He became aware that his face was pressed against cement. He was lying on the ground. But Huang could not open his eyes. As hard as he tried, he couldn't do it. He couldn't move his body. So he lay there, eyes shut, face against the pavement, listening to those clicking footsteps draw closer and closer, while anxiety rose in him, like a tide that wouldn't stop. The footsteps reached him, then passed by. He felt the brief brush of air as the person moved past his body. And after the footsteps walked away, something in him unlocked. He wrenched his eyes open and sat up. He looked around and could not find anyone. It was as if the person in high heels had vanished in plain sight. He was in what looked like the middle of a city street, but it was strangely empty, abandoned in a way cities rarely are, as though life had been paused. All he saw clearly was a clock mounted high on a building. It read 1 a.m. Panic surged through him. He began walking in circles, screaming for help. Right as he was about to break into a run, any direction, just to find another human being, he felt a tap on his shoulders. A voice behind him said, "Are you Huang Yanqiu?" Huang spun around. Two men in military uniforms stood there. For a second, relief hit him. Then he realized the wrongness. How did they know his name? He asked them. They did not answer. Instead, they told him he was at a Shanghai railway station, hundreds of miles from his village, and that they were taking him to a nearby army base. Huang was terrified. But fear makes obedience feel like the only option. He went with them. They put him in the back of a jeep, climbed in, and drove him out of the silent city. After some time, they arrived at a massive army base, rows of fencing topped with razor wire, sentries posted like statues, checkpoints layered like warnings. The soldiers brought Huang through several checkpoints, and what disturbed him later, what he couldn't make sound real, was that the guards seemed not to notice them, as if the guards' eyes slid off Huang and the two soldiers, as if they were moving through a world half a step out of alignment with everyone else. They reached the final checkpoint. They stopped. They got out. Huang got out. The two soldiers gripped Huang's shoulders and guided him through the last gate. Then they brought him to a nondescript building and led him inside. They walked down a long hallway that zigged and zagged like a maze. Finally, they stopped at a door marked Division Headquarters. One of the soldiers knocked. Before anyone could answer, he opened the door, pushed Huang inside, and stepped in after him. The other soldier followed. The door shut behind them. Inside was a large desk. Behind it sat a senior-looking military official in uniform. When the official looked up and saw Huang, he stood quickly and put his hand on his gun. "What are you doing here?" the official demanded. "How did you get in here?" Huang threw his hands up, palms open. "They brought me," he said, pointing behind him. The official looked behind Huang. "Who brought you here?" Huang turned to point, and the two soldiers were gone. Not walking away, not slipping out. Gone in a way that made Huang's stomach drop, because he knew what it meant. The only explanation he had just been taken from him. The official shouted into a radio. Within seconds, armed soldiers rushed in, grabbed Huang, and began interrogating him. "How did you get past the guards? Did you cut the fence? Did you climb? Who are you working for?" Huang had no answers. He could only repeat what he knew. "The two soldiers, they brought me." A couple of days later, Huang was bussed back to Dongbeigao. Again, friends and family demanded an explanation. Again, Huang could not give one. And then, 11 days after coming home the second time, Huang disappeared again. This third disappearance was the one that sounded the most absurd when he tried to explain it. He said he encountered two men who told him they were the same two men from the other times, the ones who had appeared in the earlier incidents. He said they put him on their backs, and he said they flew him to 9 different cities around China for reasons he could not understand. Then, he said, they flew him back to Dongbeigao and dropped him outside his house near a tree. To anyone listening, it sounded like the kind of story that collapses under scrutiny. But when people questioned him aggressively, when they treated the third story as the one he must have made up, Huang began naming details about those 9 cities, weather conditions, what performances were running, what the streets felt like, where he stood, what he saw. And according to the accounts that kept the mystery alive, those details checked out in ways that were difficult to explain for a young villager with no phone, no internet, no car, and no obvious way to gather such information overnight. By then, rumors were inevitable. Some said he was lying. Some said he was cursed. Some said he was being used by government, by spirits, by something not human. There were investigations. The military, especially, could not accept the breach of the base. Guards insisted they never saw Huang pass through. Yet Huang insisted he walked through openly with 2 soldiers holding him by the shoulders. And that contradiction, the one that could not be neatly resolved, hung over everything like a low cloud. Huang did not want the attention. But attention arrived anyway. News people, film crews, outsiders, all wanting to stare at the man whose life had become a question. His fiancée eventually broke up with him, unable to live under the weight of what the village believed about him and what Huang no longer believed about himself. His life continued, because life does. He remained in his village. He later had children, then grandchildren. But he refused to talk about what happened. Because even if the disappearances stopped, the damage didn't. The tangible resolution is that Huang came home, and eventually the vanishing ended. The unresolved residue is simpler and worse. Huang never regained the basic comfort of believing that sleep was safe, that closing your eyes in one place guaranteed you would open them in the same world. And neither did the people who watched his bed become empty 3 separate times. They went back to their routines, back to rice fields and harvest seasons, back to ordinary days. But something stayed lodged in the village's memory like grit under a fingernail. The knowledge that a person can be removed from his own life without warning, and returned with no explanation that anyone is able or willing to prove. This was Midnight Horror Society, dark curiosity for sleep. Until your next midnight session, sleep well.